I've been trying to think of a way of conceptualizing a system which runs deterministically but unpredictably. And I can't do it without introducing randomness, and I really didn't like the idea of randomness. But I think there is a way of introducing randomness as a kind of field property or as a general property, which satisfies me at least, I don't know, for the time being. And the way I'm imagining, I don't know if I'll be able to describe this really, but I'll give it a go. I'm imagining it a bit like Cellular Automata, or like Conway's Game of Life, which is you imagine a grid pattern. I'll just tell you how it works first, and I'll talk about how the randomness works. The Cellular Automata, Conway's Game of Life, is a grid pattern, like a huge chessboard. Yeah, it's a grid pattern, that's what it is. And you have a series of counters or fillings in on this grid. So you imagine one of the squares on this grid having a counter on it. And then you introduce a series of rules for how things change. So the rule might be, if a square has a counter on it, then a counter will be placed on the square next to the counter. Yeah, that's a rule. And so you start off with a counter on the square, and then you instantiate the system again applying the rule. So because the rule says there has to be a counter on the square that's got next to the one that's got a counter on it, the next instantiation will have two counters on it, one next to the one that was there originally. You do it again and then there'll be a row of 3. You do it again, there'll be a row of 4. And it'll keep doing that until the counters reach the end points of the grid, and then the game terminates. That's really, really simple. But then you can introduce other more complex rules. Not too many actually, but a couple of more rules make it more complex. Like for example with that one you might say, that rule again, if there's a square with a counter on it, you put another counter next to it. But then you introduce the rule, if there are 3 counters in a row, you take the middle counter out. And that introduces a different pattern. Because you'll start this line proceeding and then they'll start disappearing, so you'll get this much more kind of fragmented, like Morse code marching across the screen, marching across the grid. And that's basically how cellular automata work. And you can, by introducing, as I say, quite a small number of rules, and then just running the rules in, one at a time, instantiating them, one play of the game, then another play of the game, then another play of the game. You can get really, really, really complex and counterintuitive and unpredictable patterns forming. I've seen some of these where you run the instantiations you can do them in computers of course, hundreds of thousands or millions of times, millions of instantiations, play it again, play it again, play it again. And in some of them you get like relatively stable patterns forming, and sometimes these patterns will kind of fly across the grid pattern, and then another one will come on from the left and fly across for a while, and then that pattern will break down something else. As I say, just by playing out these really simple rules. Okay, that's Cellular Automata, Conway's Game of Life. But it isn't non-deterministic, it's completely deterministic. It's unpredictable, counterintuitive. It does things you wouldn't imagine it does, given the starting point and the limited number of rules available. But if you rewind it and run it again, it'll run exactly the same. Every single time you play that game with that starting point and those rules, it'll do the same thing. Which, for me at least, is one of the key ideas of determinism, isn't it? But I think if you introduced standard field kind of randomness to it, it wouldn't be the same. And the way I would do that, and if anybody can write one of these things, I'd love to see it. What I would do is I would assign a random number generator to each of those squares on the grid. So each square has a numerical quantity, which changes completely randomly with each iteration. So every time the game is moved on a stage, the number changes randomly. But all the numbers change right across the grid, so the whole field changes. And then I would build that changing numerical quality into the grid, into the rule system. So for example, I would say, that if there's 3 counters in a row, take the middle one out, unless the number is higher than 10, let's say. Or unless the number is even. Whatever it is. So you could, you're building just a fragment of randomness. You could also control the randomness. If your random number generator was assigning, assigning values to each of these different squares in the grid, and those values were between, let's say, 1 and 1,000,000, you could have a rule that only applies if that only changes when the number is above 999,999. So it's only one time in a million that the rule will not be applied. But that non-application will be completely random. Or it'll be controlled randomness. It'll be controlled, but it won't be predictable. If you rewind the whole system, it will not run the same again. Because randomness has been introduced not as a single element, but as a property of the field in which the game is being played. Yeah, I mean, that's the only way I've got so far of allowing deterministic system to run against a background of marginal randomness, and that would throw up, as I say, non-deterministic results. But that's probably a huge flaw. I don't know anything about this stuff really, but if anyone knows whether that would work or not, or ideally could write the fucking program, I'd love to see that.